What a wonderful and humbling honour it is to be here with you today. Less than 12 months ago, when I first read of your policy, From Red Tape to Red Carpet, I was very excited, but had no inkling that one day I would be standing here near you at your home, launching my second book, written in honour of such a great gentleman who has a message I truly believe that the world needs to understand. And in such astute words, you have summed up what drives economies and living standards all over the world. Put simply, to encourage investment, create employment, generate wealth, elevate living standards, and enjoy freedom. And 5,500 miles away in Australia, as my friend Andrew Robb has already said, this vision is also necessary. Only this most recent weekend, I was in London for Royal Ascot and meetings with one of our partners, Rio Tinto, and was told a little story as I limped away from Ascot about an Indian person who recognised other lady limpers and set up a little stall at Ascot selling comfortable sandals for £15 profit each to all ladies who so needed as they limped away after Royal Ascot. A very timely and helpful entrepreneur. Prime Minister Modi is on the front cover of my second book titled From Red Tape to Red Carpet. A leader who is truly doing just this, turning his country at the federal level from a country where enterprise was stifled by red tape to one where red tape is being significantly reduced, and seeing as a result his country in less than a year of office approximately doubling its economic growth to the great benefit of its citizens, and in fact now leading the world with its economic growth. This is why it's especially important that we have travelled here today to launch my book with you, and more importantly, why Prime Minister Modi's mantra, From Red Tape to Red Carpet, is so important for India and can benefit the world. Mr. Prime Minister, if I may share with you a little of my own story, and also share my story with your guests. I was very fortunate to have had a very happy childhood with loving and responsibly strict parents, and to grow up on a station in the rugged Pilbara, northwest Australia. The station comprised a vast area in what we call the Australian outback to ride around and explore in. My father knew and loved the then remote north, a north his family predecessors had settled, and were the first to build the Northwest's first town and first port in a then remote area without city amenities and without government financial assistance. They were true pioneers. They either made do or did without. There was no government support. My dad was Australia's first aerial prospector, and his discoveries undoubtedly changed the future prosperity of Australia. In 1952, a long time ago now, while flying his tiny single-engined Oster plane low to avoid clouds, Dad found what turned out to be one of the largest areas of iron ore then known anywhere in the world. It was the discovery that West Australia, a state unable to support itself and having to rely on handouts from other states, and Australia needed. It should have been celebrated, but instead the governments of the day could only find reasons not to let the country and its people make the most of this. My father had to waste 8 years of his life lobbying to get the politicians and bureaucrats to change the law that prohibited iron ore exports, to remove the red tape. Incredibly, Australian governments at the time believed Australia would run out of iron ore by the mid-1960s. Red tape discouraged people from looking, and our governments did not have a crystal ball, which they think they have for their public planning. It took another year plus to get another level of government and bureaucrats in the state of West Australia to lift its pegging ban on iron ore to allow titles so the exploration and development could proceed. And this is what happens in many countries. Even if the federal government eventually lifts federal government restrictions and red tape, that doesn't mean that the states follow. and the country still suffers. I hope in India people are far more astute and recognise that the states of India if the states of India don't also make significant efforts to lift red tape, that Prime Minister Modi's policies are not at fault and are not sufficiently valued. Mining is perhaps the most regulated of all industries in Australia, and yet my country owes so much of its prosperity to mining. Even after the boom, it still accounts for many billions per annum, or 54% of export income. Our Australian governments keep finding ways to take away our cost-competitive advantage, seemingly ignoring that Australia needs to be able to be cost-competitive in international markets, and definitely ignoring that its approvals, permits, soaring licenses and compliance costs weaken our ability to compete internationally and deter small business and deter exploration. I became chair of our private company group in 1992, and despite my father's earlier wonderful achievements, the family company was then in a parlous financial state. Over the next 20 years, with the help of a very small team of executives, one of whom is with me today. Tad, could you please stand up? Yeah. We have built the company group from a very difficult start into Australia's largest and most successful private company group. Many in the Australian media seem to think, with mining, that once you get a tenement, hey presto, the money flows. Nothing could be further from the truth. It's been hard work, long hours, dedication, perseverance, and spending time with enormous Australian red tape. Looking back, if I'd known back then what would be entailed, frankly, I doubt I'd have proceeded. However, we have started 3 major iron ore mines with our friends at Rio Tinto, and a lesser-known 4th mine is currently in progress. These bring and will continue to bring revenue, employment and opportunities to Australia for decades. My company achieved tenements for Roy Hill in January 1993. It was a huge risk and was extra difficult for us given money shortages and company problems. We applied for much of what the giant BHP, with all its expertise and capital, had decided to drop. They believed it was not a valuable opportunity, and I had my own staff and consultants saying exactly the same. But I believed in the North and wanted to try despite this. The road has been long and arduous. However, we are now months away from the start of exports from the Roy Hill mega project. Roy Hill is a mining and infrastructure project of regional, Australian and Australasian significance. I hope the screen's showing you a little bit of it. It was made possible through the achievement of the world's largest debt financing for a mainland mineral resource project, which we have received international recognition for. Spiro, I'd be delighted if you wouldn't mind standing up. Spiro, representing National Australia Bank of Australia, has been one of our very greatest supporters to achieve this mega financing. Now more than 10 million tonnes are already on stockpile. The 355-kilometre purpose-built rail line is built with 11 bridges and the dedicated port nearing completion. When capacity is reached, it will be Australia's largest iron ore mine. Australian politicians are genuinely surprised when I ask them how many approvals, permits and licences were required by government to get to construction. One of our very famous Australian politicians is sitting in the audience. Paul, can I ask you how many approvals, permits, licences you thought were required for our mega project? 35. Yeah. I mean, he's a wonderful optimist. A lot of politicians guess around 75 to approvals, permits and licences. And that doesn't count many, many more. Red tape just keep pushing up costs in Australia. And frankly, Australia can't afford this. Crucial export commodity prices are very soft. And we are moving towards a larger elderly proportion of people in our country, meaning less working base and more requiring seniors' support. But say this, and you are speared and ridiculed in Australia's left-wing media and other left-wing circles. It's so impressive to hear Prime Minister Modi speak, and with so much common sense. He acts in such contrast. Congratulations on the anniversary of your first year in office. Congratulations for the reforms you have achieved in that time and the economic growth with consequent rise in living standards that you have brought to India. What you are doing is admired by business people and others all over the world. I've travelled Australia speaking of the red tape to red carpet message in the hope of inspiring a similar movement in our own country. And similarly with my first book that Andrew mentioned, Northern Australia and Then Some, which advocated less government expense and regulation to free the north of Australia and to encourage its development. Certainly our challenges in Australia are different, but I look at this and wonder, why doesn't Australia have the sense to cut red tape? I thank ministers like Andrew who are saying similar things to I'm saying in Australia. You know, we need thought and support that fine gentlemen like Andrew are certainly leading in Australia. Government debt in Australia is the highest it has ever been in Australia, and we are still borrowing more to be able to pay the interest. Most of us would realise that's not a good situation. Australia needs to act to shed its red tape and reputation for being an expensive and unwelcoming place to do business. But sadly, Australia has become a nation where compliance is more important to our government than performance, even though we need to be a nation of performance to help our country. In India, it is recognised that red tape can lead to corruption, so it's being cut. Lack of compliance with red tape can lead to vindictive and time and money wasting action in Australia. I would prefer to see Australia cut red tape and increase its living standards like you have for India, with that outstanding dedication towards your own country. Thank you for hosting us here today. This is an amazing occasion and a highlight of my life. And I'm sure I speak for us all in saying thank you. Please know the impact you are having is being felt far and wide. Please know you have many admiring friends. And please, when you can, let your friends spend just a little time with you, thanking you for what you do, for being the outstanding leader you truly are. As from my experience with left media trying to tear one down and ridicule and misrepresent, such friendships help through the difficult times. With my deepest respect and admiration, thank you.
May I now request Honourable Prime Minister to